Chair of the Connecticut Historic Preservation Council, and I'm calling to order the December 1st, 2021 Historic Preservation Council meeting. With me this morning are the following council members: Beth Ackley, Beth Burgess, Paul Butkus, myself, Thomas Elmore as chair, Margaret Faber, Leah Glazer, Christine Nelson as vice chair, Sarah Nelson, Sarah Sportman, and Walter Woodward. We have a quorum, so let's get started. The following is the Historic Preservation Council's format and review of public comment procedures. Given the online format of today's meeting, and for those who are visitors, I want to review and explain our procedures. The order of the presentation. I will read each motion and ask for the motion to be moved and seconded. Staff will present the agenda item to the council. Council members will have an opportunity to ask questions. If called upon by staff, representatives of the organization may offer statements or address council's questions. For members of the public who wish to speak to the agenda item, we ask that you identify yourself and your affiliation. After all questions have been addressed and statements made, a roll call vote will be taken. If members of the public have letters and/or written statements they wish to submit to the record, please email them to Jonathan Kinney. His email address is jonathan.kinney@ct.gov. The Historic Preservation Council takes statements from members of the public but does not respond to questions. And lastly, please only address the particular agenda item being addressed at that time. The following is a Historic Preservation Council policy regarding conflict of interest. The Historic Preservation Council votes on matters which provide leadership, service, and economic benefit to property owners, consultants, local governments, and not-for-profit organizations. Given this responsibility and to maintain the highest professional standards in the discharge of our duties, it is important to maintain a strong code of ethics for all council members and department employees. In order to avoid possible violations of the Department of Economic and Community Development Ethics Statement, it is necessary for the council to be aware of any situations in which there is a real, potential, or apparent conflict of interest involving anyone here. A conflict of interest may occur when a public official's participation in agency matters results in personal financial gain. All council and staff have been provided with a copy of the Department of Economic and Community Development's ethics statement and governing state statutes. Having reviewed them and today's agenda, members of the council and staff are now asked to disclose any affiliation with entities or projects that may create a conflict of interest as defined by agency policy and pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 1-79 through 1-89, entitled Code of Ethics for Public Officials. Once disclosed, the members or staff may recuse themselves from that particular agenda item. Having read this statement, are there any council or staff members that would like to disclose a conflict of interest to any of the items on today's agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll get started. The meeting minutes, item 4.A is meeting minutes from the November 3rd, 2021 meeting. Minutes have been provided to council members in Dropbox. I'm assuming everybody has had a chance to read them. Are there any corrections to the minutes as they've been presented?
Yeah, Tom.
Jonathan, or Paul, I'm sorry. I was looking at Jonathan.
Could we add the addresses to the threatened properties? I think Todd mentioned them during the meeting, but they don't show up in the minutes. They just go by locality.
Jonathan, your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, no problem. I
Okay.
apologize for missing that.
No, that's fine. So Jonathan, we'll just have that as standard protocol moving forward?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, very good. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Jonathan, did you get any comments from any council members before?
I did not. No.
Okay. So may I have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
So moved, Christine.
And a second?
Second, Walt.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. I'll take a roll call vote. Beth Ackley,
Aye.
Beth Burgess,
Aye.
Paul Butkus.
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber,
Abstain, I was absent.
Leah Glazer,
Aye.
Christine Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Nelson,
Abstain, I was absent.
Sarah Sportman,
Aye.
Walter Woodward,
Aye.
and Ellen's not here. Jonathan, would you let me know if Ellen arrives, please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. So motion carries. Minutes are approved as submitted with that addition of the addresses. Moving on to the new action items. Before we get into the individual items, Jenny wants to talk to us with regard to the National Register process. Jenny, it's all yours.
Good morning. I have a couple slides, so if you don't mind, I'll just share my screen. Okay, let's hope it works.
Jenny, for visitors, this is Jenny Schofield.
Yes, I'm Jen Schofield. I'm the National Register and Architectural Survey Coordinator at SHPO. Can you see a title slide?
Yes.
Okay, so the Historic Preservation Council often reviews survey and planning grant applications for National Register projects. So I thought it would be helpful to just share some information about the National Register. So you often see grant projects for both new nominations and updates to existing nominations. Could be either for state or National Register or National Historic Landmarks. So I'm going to focus mostly on National Register updates and then share a little information about the level of documentation that we currently collect in nominations. So you all know, and you know I like to talk about how SHPOs and the National Register were created with the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. This is the first moment in time when cultural resources get equal consideration as something that we want to protect in public trust. The earliest National Register nominations in the state were actually properties that were already recognized through an early National Historic Landmark type of designation. And in Connecticut, we have about 500 individual property and district nominations that were prepared between 1966 and 1982. And the reason why I'm telling you all this is because when the program first started, it really was just a very quick identification effort. We just created a recognition program and we had to canvass the country for the things that were easiest to find that we knew we wanted to protect. So the level of documentation that was done at that time was very similar to a reconnaissance level survey form. So I'm showing you a picture of one of the properties that actually was an existing NHL under a different name. Was officially listed in the National Register in 1964, even though the program started in '66 because of that status. And the documentation form actually wasn't filled out until 1974. You're seeing the first page of the significance statement. There are only 2 other pages. So you can see when the program first started, the level of information collected was very brief and in this checkbox format. And I just want to reiterate, there was nothing wrong with this at that moment in time. This is the beginning of the program. So it does not meet our current standards of documentation, but there was nothing incorrect about doing this. And one of the reasons why you see so many properties recognized for architecture at the time is because very little research was required to recognize the architectural qualities just by looking at them. Whereas properties that are significant for areas like social history aren't always known to the blind eye if you're just walking past them. You're going to see a lot of probably grant applications for updates to older nominations or even more recent nominations where something has changed. So the types of information that we would update, and let me back up for a minute and say, when we open up a nomination to add to it or correct information, I don't like to do that piecemeal, and neither does the Park Service. So typically, if we open something up for updating, we're going to try to update everything that needs addressing. So we would itemize all of the resources included in the nominated property. Oftentimes, those weren't itemized in the early nominations. We would check to see if those resources are still contributing or not contributing, if they were categorized at all originally. We add a lot more detail to the description. We add a lot more detail about the setting and the landscape, and also outbuildings, which often, particularly in the 70s, weren't caught. They weren't even recognized as being there sometimes. We review the boundaries both to see if there are any areas where it should be decreased because something is lost, or areas where something was missed and should have been included. And then, of course, all of the reasons why it's significant. So areas of significance, the time period that applies. Oftentimes, the early nominations stopped around 1920 or 1930, and we have reason to extend those periods of significance to a later date. We often add areas of significance that weren't recognized before. And of course, we do a lot better job at mapping and photography now. So just giving you an example here, this is that same on the left, or the page that starts with description at the top. This is the whole description of the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station that was first recognized in 1964. That's it. This one page is all you get. On the other side is just a few paragraphs from a 100-page National Register nomination that has at least 30 pages of descriptive text. So I mentioned that we're paying a lot more attention to the landscape, the setting, and outbuildings. These are all things that typically get described in a current nomination today. But I would say even 10 years ago, landscape and setting didn't necessarily get a lot of attention. The Hillstead National Historic Landmark nomination was actually just recently updated to better describe the landscape, better describe the outbuildings and itemize those, and also to add some scholarship to women's history for Theodore Pope Riddle, who helped design the house. Okay, this is a recent National Register nomination that we did for the Orange Street National Register Historic District in New Haven. You can see the purple is an existing different historic district. The blue was the existing Orange Street district, and then the district was actually expanded into that red area. And on one of those streets, there were actually identical houses across from each other that some were included in the original district and some were not. So that's a typical expansion that we might do. Also, you're seeing the typical data table from a National Register district. You should be familiar with this because a lot of what we do on the state register that you review looks similar. So in this case, we had two data tables. We went back through the existing district and itemized everything and double checked the contributing status, and then made a new table for the expanded area. So I'm just trying to show you examples of the type of information that we now collect. Level of significance, this is who is the history important to. So about 80 or 90% of what's on the National Register across the country is actually significant to the local community. It doesn't necessarily have national importance. But in this case, you all know the Barnum Museum, and I gotta give a nod to Kathy since she's not here. In 2010, we took the National Register nomination for the Barnum Museum, which didn't actually even define a level of significance, and updated that to national level. And that was a precursor to the active National Historic Landmark designation that is happening now. Just a note on the National Register criteria. The state register criteria are modeled after these, so they're basically the same. The National Register criteria have been the same since the conception of the program in the 60s, and the 1977 bulletin from the Park Service on how to write National Register forms. They are pretty broad categories, so they can actually be very inclusive in terms of themes of significance if you know how to use them. So if you look at, this is from the National Register How-To Bulletin. These are some suggestions for themes of significance that properties or districts might be eligible for. And again, this dates back to the beginning of the program. So you can see that ethnic heritage and social history, for example, are areas that were recognized even then. They just weren't always used, because if you have nothing listed, the first things you're going to list are the ones that are easy to find. And I'll add here that women's history is a major one that we see a lot of nominations for across the country. That's not listed here, but is one that's common in the National Register program, as well as civil rights history. But these are suggestions. You can write in other categories if they don't quite fit. And this is a big one for National Register updates, and for any nomination before it goes to the Park Service, has to have a really good map. This is a snapshot of a map from Waveney, where you can see they're mapping abandoned farm road traces, stone walls, the tree alleys, agricultural fields, and then a variety of other buildings and structures within the landscape. And this is really important because we need a map that matches up to all the resources that are described in the text and in the data table. Otherwise, it's hard to preserve those features if we don't really know where they are or what they are. And here's just another example of map documentation. This is for a recent district in Clinton. So on one side, you see the district map where all of the buildings are itemized and called out and keyed to a data table. And then there's a detail of the industrial complex that's in the corner, so we actually know the function and dates of each of those sections of the buildings. And I will end here because I know we have a lot to get to, but I just wanted to touch on what doesn't go in a National Register nomination. This is not a place to put every historical fact you've ever learned about a place, necessarily. All of the information should be related to the current physical description of the property or the time period and reasons why you're saying the property is important. So I see a lot of first draft nominations that start in 1600 something and talk about general town European settlement when the period of significance is the 20th century. So that kind of information and general background information, plans about, future restoration ideals, that kind of stuff does not go in a National Register nomination and would not be something that we would add to that. So that's not the appropriate document for that. So I'm going to end there and stop sharing. So if anybody has any questions afterwards, just let me know. I'd be happy to answer.
Jenny, can you share the PowerPoint with us at some point?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
All right. So Jenny, we're going to hold off on questions to you at this time. Okay, that's fine. So let's proceed with our agenda items. First item on today's agenda is 5B1. The Historic Preservation Council votes to recommend the award of a certified local government Historic Preservation Enhancement Grant funded by the Historic Preservation Fund of the United States Department of Interior, National Park Service to the below listed applicant in the amount shown. All grant guidelines and state requirements shall be met by the below listed applicant upon receipt of a grant as administered by the Department of Economic and Community Development. Staff recommends the application for funding. The applicant, Town of Clinton, project, National Register nomination for proposed Commerce Street, Leffingwell Road area, Clinton, Connecticut. Grant amount for $20,000. I have a motion to move this to the table for discussion. Sarah, a second.
Margaret?
Okay.
And Mary.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So staff recommends approval of this application. I did ask Jenny to take a look at the proposed, actually, she's been working with Peggy Adler, who's here from the town of Clinton, just to take a look at, to see if this is eligible for exploration, and it is. The map that was included kind of circles the general area, but the boundaries will be determined over the process of the nomination process. And also the budget does look like it's sufficient to cover this district. So as I said, Peggy Adler is here if there's some questions that I can't answer, but otherwise, are there any comments, concerns, or questions?
Sarah?
It's not a comment, Mary. I'm very supportive of this effort. My travels also take me down that area of Clinton, and it's thrilling to see that the town is actually working to preserve it. I was not clear from the application. It talked about the relationship of the National Register districts to one another, and I realized the boundary is in flux and will be determined during the process of consultation, but it would be helpful to, in the final document, to understand the interrelationship of the National Register districts in Clinton to one another, to look for possible gaps.
And I think this was originally conceived sort of as an expansion, but it was determined during just the initial look that it should be a single district, even though it's very close to the other existing districts and does bear some relationship, at least as far as I think development patterns, but I'll defer to Jenny on that one. So
It may abut two existing districts to the north and to the east. But the development patterns in those other two districts are different. So Peggy and I did look at multiple potential projects, and the HDC chose this one. It is a pretty consistent neighborhood of late 19th through early 20th century housing. The area to the north is the commercial center, and the area to the east is earlier and around the green. Did I get that right, Peggy? Okay.
Beth Ackley, I see your hand up.
Yes. Mary and maybe Jenny, just a quick refresher for us. Can you remind us the difference between a certified local government Historic Preservation Enhancement Grant, when that qualifies over a survey and planning grant for some of these nominations?
Sure, and I probably should have done that before now, but yeah, the Certified Local Government Program is a partnership with the Park Service and our office and about 51 municipalities right now in Connecticut. And so the CLG Historic Preservation Enhancement Grant is federal funding, non-matching. It basically has the same eligible activities as a survey and planning grant. And a CLG can certainly apply for survey and planning, but generally we encourage the survey and planning grant is for nonprofits and municipalities that are not certified local governments, because the federal is just an extra.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Leah?
Yes. So just on, based on what Jenny was sort of saying, I didn't quite get an understanding of what was in this historic district with the application. You know, any specifically, and then it talks about the other two, and I was just wondering about what their significance is. Because I think that would be helpful also for getting a consultant, you know, to understand the significance of this proposed or these proposed districts, just to get understanding of what they'd be doing, you know, of what the content is there, both historically and architecturally. That's just what I had questions about.
So again, this is a neighborhood of late 19th through early 20th century housing. It's primarily single family housing, including some pattern houses or kit houses. It does not appear to be worker housing of any kind. It's higher income than that historically. I'm not aware of social history themes that may apply yet, but research has not been done on who the residents were yet. The other areas, one is Clinton's commercial downtown. So the area of significance there would be more related to commerce, business development, and the area to the east is much earlier settlement. This district does have one church in it, a congregational church, I think. No. You're muted.
The Methodist church is there.
Methodist church. Okay. And it does potentially go down to the waterfront as well as the earlier period district does. But the period of significance would likely not be for maritime history in this location.
Yeah, Leah.
So yeah, just to follow up. So yeah, I mean, that's I guess what I wanted to know, whether it would be sort of something, I mean, holistically different from those others. And then I know twice it asks sort of that the consultant will look for other diverse stories. And I'm just, especially for the RFP, wondering if that can just be made, that's kind of code, you know, just a little bit more explicit so that it attracts people who will, and if it's not there, it's not there, but to actively look for, I don't know if everybody kind of understands what they need to look for in terms of communities of color or indigenous stories or things like that, just to be a little more explicit. And again, you know, it might not be there, but
yeah,
because nobody's looked, you know. So.
It really should be a normal part of the research when you start to look into a place. Now, I think it's pretty standard.
Agree. I just want to ensure that while we're in this sort of transition period where I'm not sure that that is obvious to everybody.
Go ahead, Peggy.
Commerce Street, which runs from Route 1 down to the waterfront, at the lower end of it is the area that is generally called now Indian Acres, but it was the 6 acres that the indigenous people retained after when the original settlement came into existence in 1663. And it's the community has actually speaks in Indian, Iroquois, Indian tribe, Mohawk tribe, and so on, but it's the area which the indigenous people retained when the original settlement took place in 1663.
So has that part been recognized, or is that anything that could be part of criteria D, or not really?
I was told that there was a golf course that was there at one point, and then it was replaced by houses which really have no architectural significance. It's just an interesting aspect of that strip of road of Commerce Street going Route 1 down.
Yeah, the integrity of that landscape is lost. It's all contemporary housing tract. And the land has been leveled for that.
Any other questions? So we have a motion on the table to approve the grant. I'll take a roll call vote. Beth Ackley,
Aye.
Beth Burgess,
Aye.
Paul Butkus.
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber,
Aye.
Leah Glazer,
Aye.
Christine Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Sportman,
Aye.
and Walter Woodward. Walter? Hello? All right, well, we won't take Walter's vote. We have sufficient numbers here to carry the grant. So congratulations, good luck with it. We look forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
Second item on the agenda is 5B2. The Historic Preservation Council votes to recommend the award of a survey and planning grant funded by the Community Investment Act of the State of Connecticut to the below listed applicant in the amount shown. All grant guidelines and state requirements shall be met by the below listed applicant upon receipt of a grant as administered by the Department of Economic and Community Development. Staff recommends the application for funding. The applicant, Town of Wethersfield. Project, consulting services to prepare a state register nomination form for the Kaisia Farm Barn dated 1913, located on Highland Road in Wethersfield. Grant amount of $5,000. I have a motion to move the.
So moved. Beth Burgess.
And a
Second, Christine.
And a discussion, Mary?
Sure. So staff recommends approval of this application. The town acquired, as it says in the application, the barn about 3 years ago and put in place a committee to kind of explore its condition and its reuse possibilities. But it currently has no designation. And so it's not really, exploring the state register nomination will give them a lot more information about the history and the architecture of the building. And it will also make them eligible for funding to explore pre-development and development grants. So our state register coordinator, Marina, has been out to the site and does think that it's, made a preliminary eligibility determination. So, and the budget is in order. So we do recommend approval of the application, and I believe Jim Woodworth from the town is here to answer any questions that I can't.
Okay, great. Questions from council? I see Beth's hands up and somebody else. Oh, we got a few hands. Go ahead, Beth.
Okay, Mary, can you give us a little context of the barn on what was a former farm? Is it a large farm? Is it, is there, I guess where I'm going with this, is there any need to call this the farm instead of the barn for the nomination?
That will be part of the exploration. From what I understand, it is the only
yeah, Mary, if
property.
you want me to hop in. Yeah,
Is that
hi
Marina?
everybody, it's
Okay.
Marina Wisniewski, State Register Coordinator. Yeah, so when we were out there, we took a look at the property that the town had acquired. Across the road was land that was associated with this building, but it's a more contemporary mid-20th century family home. So it was and it's my understanding that this was a multi-generational family farm. And as the farm evolved, the original house was either subdivided off or is no longer extant. And so there was this mid-20th century house. So what we're dealing with now is a parcel that is on one side of the road. Mary, I'm not exactly sure how many acres it is, but the only other ancillary structures that were out there were some temporary greenhouses, and there was another sort of like a small shed, but that had collapsed in on itself by the time we went out there. So actually what we're looking at is really the last building of a dairy farm, which is one of the very few farms that is left in the area. Weatherfield used to have many, many dairy farms, and now we're really down to very, very few. And this building is one of the last vestiges of that industry in town.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Marina. And are all the pastures all been developed now too?
I don't know. I'm gonna punt that to the representative from the town if they're able to answer that. But like I said, as far as the property parcels in the back, you have some fields and they utilize that farmland. I think it can be active farmland, but they were utilizing it for temporary greenhouse structures.
Okay, thanks.
Does the gentleman from Weathersfield want to jump in and help us out here? He's on mute. Jonathan, can you unmute him?
I cannot. Mr. Woodworth, you're muted. Can you turn your mic on?
Like that.
There you go. Thank you.
There we go.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Sorry. Yeah, so there's about 30 acres altogether in this parcel. And as you can imagine, I don't know how big the original farm might have been at its peak, but houses have kind of encroached in various directions. There's a ball field adjacent to the lot with the barn on it, which, as Marina explained, certainly had an older house in the front yard of the barn, closer to the street. There's some bricks, a pile of bricks out back somewhere that must have been a chimney from that. The date of 1913, I'm imagining maybe an older barn, perhaps on the same location that this one. I look forward to having Todd or somebody come out there and say, okay, this barn was probably actually built whenever. But one of the things that I've discovered talking to one of the family members, that there are extant movies of the of bringing the cows back to the barn from the pasture, which is part of that across the street area. And it's wetlands that have grown up to a lot of invasive species and so forth. But part of our committee was, how can we reuse this? And probably some of the fields will go to athletic fields, but we would love to have an agriculture enterprise of some kind come back in, perhaps with a nonprofit organization, and the barn would be kind of the center of that agricultural infrastructure, so to speak. So there are areas that can be farmed, and we have an adjacent, not really adjacent, but not too far away, the other farm that the town preserved some years ago with there were 80 acres. I don't know how much of that is still in hay, but a great deal of it is. So there's still a lot of potential there, but this barn would be kind of the center of that.
Great, thank you. Leah, you have a question?
No, so yes. So I guess again, just something to make sure that somebody covers is that this might give Weathersfield an opportunity to just diversify its stories a little bit by trying to think the dairy thing. The dairy story is really important, and just to look into labor and who was there working on the dairy farm, unless it was just a family enterprise. So that was my main comment.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
If I could just add one thing in the trajectory, I guess, of the dairy industry, there were laws passed in the 60s, I guess, that said you had to have refrigeration and things, and that's when the dairy operation ended. But they converted to vegetables, and there's some articles about the wonderful strawberries they produced and that kind of thing. So there's a whole history of the agriculture, I guess, over the 20th century.
Great. Thank you. Margaret, you have a question?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just do, about the budget. On the form, it says they're asking for 5,175, but on the cover sheet, it's 5,000. That's the first thing. And secondly, after they finish this, I'd encourage them to go for a conditions assessment, for the structure, and then hopefully create a preservation plan. So it's great barn. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mary, will you take care of that budget?
Yeah.
For us?
Sorry about, sorry about that.
Good
Do we
catch.
need to, because they are asking for 5,175. Do we need to revise the motion,
We can revise the motion.
or can we revise?
Yeah. Well, we will revise the motion right before we take our vote to include, what was it, 5,000 what?
They're actually asking for 5,175.
Okay.
Hey, Jim, this is Todd Levine. I just want to say that I look forward to coming and checking out your barn.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I remember those two memorable barn tours we took back in the day.
Yes, good times, good times.
And both of those barns are still existing, and that's at least partly due to your efforts.
Thank you.
So appreciate it.
Paul, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. There, in the descriptions of when the property was purchased, one paragraph says it was 2019, and the next paragraph says it's 2020. And I just wanted to clarify, because the documentation has both dates listed. There's a paragraph B1 and B2 had the two different dates.
Yeah, which the referendum must have been 2018. Took a while for the committee to get started, and then we met and COVID started, and now we're at the recommendation stage. But 2018 has to be the proper.
Right, it was basically in reference to the closing. We completed the purchase. It says
okay, yeah.
one paragraph 2020, and then the other one is 2019.
Yeah,
so just
that might be. Yeah, I'm not sure. Those things always take what seems like an interminable amount of time to finalize.
I see somebody has their hand up with the initials PA. No? Okay.
It's Peggy Adler. It may be left over from the last item.
All right, that'd be fine. And Leah, I see your hand is up. Is it still up, or do you have another question?
Yeah, I just have another comment. Several years ago, one of my students did her capstone. She did a cultural landscape report on Wilkes Farm in Wethersfield. That has some information and photos and some information. She does have something in the bibliography about dairy farming. So just as an FYI, there's a bunch of documentation and research here for whoever is going to do this investigation.
That's great. They
send.
Those two farms are so parallel. One's a Polish immigrant, one's an Italian immigrant. Started about the same time. Went through similar similar trajectory, I guess. And Wilkes Dairy Barn burned in the 40s. And the nieces were sure that a historic barn had been taken from West Hartford and moved there. And Todd and I went in and said, it's not a historic barn, looks like 40s construction, I think is the conclusion, but still very parallel development. both in dairy and culturally, I would think.
Yeah, this is like, it's like I mean, a lot of it's photos, but it's 44 pages. So if you let me know. You
It'll all
want a
help.
copy.
Sure.
The Weathersfield Historical Society should have a copy. That was the partner for it, but if you, I still have it here.
Interesting. I will
Mhm.
talk with them.
All right. I need to have a motion from council to revise the application with the new dollar amount from $5,000 to $5,175. May I have a motion to accept that change?
This is Sarah. I'll make a motion to change the grant amount to 5,175.
This is Walt, second.
Great, thank you. Hang on a second, let me just make some notes here. Very good. We'll take a roll call vote with that revision in mind. Beth Ackley,
Aye.
Beth Burgess,
Aye.
Paul Butkus.
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber,
Aye.
Leah Glazer,
Aye.
Christine Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Sportman,
Aye.
and Walter Woodward.
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Good luck.
Tom,
you.
Tom,
Yes, Sarah.
point of order. So in a revised motion, what we've just done is the council has voted to change the grant amount to 501,175. That change, then you would vote upon the grant per se with the new revised amount.
Okay, so that sounds fine. So we'll back up. So we're gonna do, Sarah, do we need to redo the approval? Can we just go back and redo the revised grant amount?
So council has now approved the secondary motion, which was to revise the grant amount to 500,175. So
Okay.
now the motion is on the table, that we're back to the original modified motion.
What are we gonna do without you? All right, so we'll take a second roll call vote. Jonathan, I hope you're keeping track.
We got it.
So now we're taking a vote to approve the application as revised. So Beth Ackley,
Aye.
Beth Burgess,
Aye.
Paul Butkus.
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber,
Aye.
Leah Glazer,
Aye.
Christine Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Sportman,
Aye.
and Walter Woodward.
Aye.
Very good. Now the motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Before we go on to the next motion, I want to just, for the record, acknowledge a chat from Walter on the previous grant application that we could not hear his mic, and he was an aye vote for that one. Okay. All right, next item on the agenda is 5B3. The Historic Preservation Council votes to recommend the award of a survey and planning grant funded by the Community Investment Act of the State of Connecticut to the below listed applicant in the amount shown. All grant guidelines and state requirements shall be met by the below listed applicant upon receipt of a grant as administered by the Department of Economic and Community Development. Staff recommends the application for funding. The applicant, Music Mountain Incorporated. Project, consulting services for a CFR qualified architect and appropriate team to prepare a condition assessment of Music Mountain dated 1930, located at 225 Music Mountain Road in Falls Village, Connecticut. Grant amount of $20,000. May I have a motion to move this to the table for discussion?
So moved, Margaret?
And a second?
Paul?
And Mary.
Okay, great. So we recommend approval of this application. This is an application that came in last spring under the no match waive, so they're only asking for $20,000. In discussions with the applicant, because this campus consists of several buildings, there's some concern that 20,000 may not be enough. So to that end, the organization is standing ready to contribute some funding, even though this falls under the match waive, or in the RFP process do some adults, maybe in the application they did prioritize the buildings that they want to look at first, and then if funding is adequate, move on to the other buildings. So we do recommend approval. Oscar Espina Ruiz is here from Music Mountain, in case there are some questions that I can't answer.
Sarah?
Mary, just touching on what you were just talking about in terms of the budget and the applicant is ready to prioritize. Throughout the application, I was reading language, thorough, comprehensive, detailed cost estimate. And so there's also an expectation for what the applicant is going to get for the budget, wherever that ends up, because when you talk about detailed, thorough, comprehensive, exhaustive, it's a type of condition assessment that is very time consuming. It's consultant heavy because you have structural engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, you're doing code review. And so it almost seems like this is a kind of first request to get a handle on the buildings. And it might be more of a cursory or an overview to identify key issues. But my perspective is that thinking along the terms comprehensive, thorough, exhaustive is just not a good match for this budget.
No, yeah, I agree, and that's why I did initiate conversations with the applicant during the process, just to kind of let them know that, and then the RFP can sort of reflect maybe a more minimized scope of work, because there are 5 or 6 buildings here too, and yeah. So the applicant understands, and so we will fashion the RFP to reflect that, so that they're not disappointed, but they get something that they feel they can use.
Can I ask a question based on Sarah's discussion? Would it not be better to focus on the prioritized building first versus getting a cursory review of everything? And I'm opening that up to the council for discussion, because again, I would hate to have them get something that's not usable.
Yes, and they actually, after they submitted the application, they did then submit sort of their priority, what they want to see first. So it may be that the RFP will focus on that top priority. And they can always come back for additional funding to either do in-depth focus one building at a time, or do a more, as Sarah said, cursory review, just to give them a heads up about key issues that need to be addressed and explored further.
So, but that begs the question, what are we voting on? So we can just table that thought for a second, because I see some other hands up. Beth Burgess, you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Tom. It was along the same lines. I mean, there's a lot of reference to mold throughout, and prioritizing the venue because that's what the public sees. But I'm torn between the not comprehensive, but overall condition assessment versus particular ones. So that's, I guess, a comment more so.
Beth Ackley?
This question is not as random as it sounds, but are these buildings used year round? Is Gordon Hall used year round, or are these very seasonal?
Their performance is seasonal, but I think Oscar might be able to answer whether there's like residencies or other things going on.
Yes, good morning, everybody, if I may. Yeah, I've been raising my hand. Well, to reply to the last question, it's seasonal. We only use these buildings in the summer. They are not insulated. Regarding cursory versus detailed, we've had a number of cursory inspections already done by builders that have led to a number of repairs throughout the past 4 years or so. I've been working here for 5. I understood very quickly that the buildings needed repair and that the inspections that had been done to date were not well done professionally, in my opinion. So we started a process that over the years has brought a lot more maintenance and repairs, but realizing that even after these 4 years of cursory inspections and I would say significant repairs, we have so much to catch up that we really need a more professional, a more comprehensive assessment. We have, I thought we had decided that we are willing to prioritize and use this funding towards the assessment of the Big House and the Viola House, which are 2 houses we use to host students and faculty. And that will be really, really helpful. These are the buildings that are in better shape. The others are actually in worse shape than these 2, excluding Gordon Hall. Gordon Hall is our main building where we present our concerts and is the better maintained building. But if we could get to assess more thoroughly the Big House and the Viola House, which has no mold at the moment, it has the Viola House had a full mold remediation job last, 2 summers ago. So I think that those 2 buildings are hopeful, and they could probably come to becoming really well restored through this process, we hope. So we would like to prioritize those 2 buildings.
What is the size of those buildings? And I asked that question for our architect and structural engineer on the council. Oscar, how big are those buildings, square foot wise?
I don't have that number. The Big House is a 2-story building with an attic. It has, I think it's 7 bedrooms, kitchen, living room, dining room. It's a large house. But the cottages are significantly smaller. They have 2 bedrooms, 2, 1, 2, 3. They have 5 bedrooms, 2 baths. Those are the small ones.
Okay.
Is the Big House in the application named the First Violin House? Yes, it is. I see that.
Yeah, we kind of use both names almost all the time because we've been going back and forth.
Beth Burgess, you have a new question, or is your hand still up? No? Okay. Are there existing floor plans for the house to help the consultant kickstart the project, or are they going to have to create those?
I think they will have to create those.
Okay.
We have photographs of all the rooms of all the buildings taken professionally, but not the measurements and floor plans.
They submitted floor plans for one of the cottages, and apparently the smaller buildings are fairly identical in size. So whether those are adequate, they're in the application, but whether they are measured, but I don't know if they're adequate for this type of report.
One was produced for the mold remediation of the Viola House in 2019. So I don't know if that's the one you have, Mary.
I think so.
Yeah.
Sarah, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask for your thoughts.
Well, I think, Tom, my professional preference is always to try and get as much detailed information as we can to help owners further along the process. Now hearing from Oscar about what the priorities are, it seems like there could be a project which is two buildings for an in-depth study. And I think that that's much more realistic given the constraints of the budget. I worry about buildings that are in worse shape. I don't know if there's any other funding that can help Music Mountain, like the 1772 Foundation or some other organization that can continue to help them while this study is ongoing. But I would feel more comfortable narrowing the scope of this condition assessment to 2 buildings. Want to ask Beth what her thoughts are.
I agree with you completely, Sarah. So limiting the scope to the priority of those 2 buildings is a lot more comfortable for the grant amount. And I think I also had the same exact feeling that there's a concern that these are the buildings that are in better shape. And so maybe the RFP could be structured in a way where there's a base piece and an additional piece, just so that you can get the pricing of the other things, see if you could afford to do something, because ultimately once a consultant is out there, even though it's a separate building, they're already out there. So there's a little bit of efficiency through that. So, yeah.
You read my mind. I was really hoping for that. Because those buildings the worst ones have been in use until 2019. And they have really gone through significant deterioration through the last 2 years. So it would be really great to see what we can do, even if it's a little bit more cursory for those 2, at least to stop the damage and save them until we are ready to take care of them.
Are you getting roof leaks? Is that the issue? No.
No, mold in the basement.
Mold in the basement is the big.
To the point that some of the beams have been damaged, and I don't know if those are structural. So I really would like to stop the damage if possible.
So you need to find the root cause of the mold, I think.
Yes.
Mary, can you enlighten us on the process of one grant application versus multiple grants running concurrently?
Well, our general policy is that an organization can only have one of each at a time. So you can have a survey and planning and an HRF grant and a partners in preservation grant, but generally not 2 survey and plannings. That's not a rule. That's not in statute. That's just our general policy. So, I mean.
So here's why I asked that question. I've never been to the site. I actually did a Google Earth map to see what it looked like, and it's just a phenomenal landscape. But I'm hearing that the smaller buildings need immediate attention, and yet we're going to be focusing on the bigger buildings, which maybe could wait a year or 2 or 3. I guess I'd like to open this up to see if there are some other funding opportunities to kickstart the small buildings while the bigger ones are going forward, or to flip this grant around and focus on the little buildings. And I'm just throwing that out for discussion. Yes, Oscar.
Yeah, my opinion about that is the following. I mean, I do agree in part, because I would like to stop the damage. I don't want to find ourselves 2 years later when we address the smaller buildings that we cannot salvage them any longer. So yes, I would like to address them immediately, but maybe in a cursory manner, and also maybe by means of having Music Mountain match your grant potentially if it's approved. Music Mountain is willing and able to seek additional funding for something like this, in my opinion. In my experience, we have always had this kind of special calls. Just 1 year ago, I was reaching out to our base to repair the green room in Gordon Hall, a $60,000 project, and we successfully raised the funding. I touch wood. I don't know how much longer that would last, but so here we want to make sure that the other two buildings don't collapse. Now, at the same time, the two buildings for which we are seeking this grant are the two buildings that we currently use for the education program. And so they also have I guess, a
Hi, this is
financial
Mary.
repercussion, right? So if we want
Hey,
to
how
be
you doing?
certain that they are safe, we want to be certain that we can continue
Good.
what we have, doing what we have done in the past 90 years, having students. And so that's important. I mean, we want to be very sure that the Viola and the Big House are sustained while we are closing the other two buildings for the time being. Now, the best of both worlds would be to use the funding from this grant towards the Viola House and the Big House to have a thorough assessment, and then, if at all possible, to look at the other two buildings, and if additional funding is necessary, to look at the other two buildings in worse shape, even in a cursory manner. Maybe Music Mountain would seek the additional funding for that.
So Mary, could the RFP be structured such that the people bidding on the project give a price for the other structures, and then Music Mountain could be responsible for that? But there lies, so that one consultant is taking on the entire site, or one team of consultants?
Yes, and that was sort of what we were advising, in this event, that the RFP kind of parse out, not as a whole, thorough, comprehensive, but kind of piece it out. And also, Music Mountain did offer, as Oscar just did, that that they could certainly provide additional funding as necessary. So the RFP can definitely be parsed out.
Okay. I think in this situation that's going to help a lot. I see two other hands that are up. Christine Nelson.
Thank you. I like the idea of expanding the condition assessment if possible, because that's also going to reinforce your choices for where to focus or prioritize on actually doing the work. And you mentioned that the two buildings that you're focusing on with the grant anyway, are the buildings where you're doing most of your education. And so I wondered, is that where your educators and guests also stay? Where they lodge?
Yes, they serve as dormitory and also dining hall and also a classroom or rehearsal space.
So that's essential space for you.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Paul, I see your hand up.
Yes, I was going to just say that since several of the buildings are identical, the Viola House, you can glean a lot if you're doing code upgrades for electrical and accessibility and things like that. So you can get some budget planning for the other buildings, but in the RFP, limit the scope to addressing the moisture issues and the molds in the basements. And that way you'll tackle that critical piece, so you're not exacerbating the problems on those, but you'll be able to get some broad numbers to say, okay, we're going to have to spend $100,000 to put a new roof on, and whatever else is generally needed, instead of putting it completely as additional conditions assessments, in totality for those other buildings. So just kind of put the Band-Aid on the basement issue, so you're not exacerbating it for the next 2 years, and then you'll actually get some usable information based on the Viola House that you can apply to the other two.
So it sounds like we're in agreement. Mary, you got your work cut out for you for organizing the RFP.
Yeah, I think we'll work together.
Okay.
And I understand.
Great. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns from council members? No? Hearing none, we'll take a vote to approve the grant. Beth Ackley?
Aye.
Beth Burgess?
Aye.
Paul Butchus?
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber?
Aye.
Leah Glazer?
Aye.
Christine Nelson?
Aye.
Sarah Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Sportman,
Aye.
and Walter Woodward.
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is 5B4. The Historic Preservation Council votes to recommend the award of a survey and planning grant funded by the Community Investment Act of the State of Connecticut to the below listed applicant in the amount shown. All grant guidelines and state requirements shall be met by the below listed applicant upon receipt of a grant as administered by the Department of Economic and Community Development. Staff recommends the application for funding. The applicant, Full Gospel Interdenominational Church Incorporated. Project, consulting services of a CFR qualified architect and appropriate team to prepare a condition assessment of the Full Gospel Interdenominational Church building dated 1924, located at 745 Main Street in Manchester. Grant amount for $20,000. May I have a motion to move this to the table for discussion?
So moved. Mhm. Second, Christine.
Well, Christine, I wrote you down first, so you get the motion. Who was the second?
Margaret, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right, and Mary?
Okay, so another condition assessment, as you could, which we recommend for approval. As you can see from the photos, and from my discussions with the organization, most of the issues that are presenting are on the exterior. The interior is fairly has its integrity and isn't presenting a lot of issues. But as you can tell, there are some things going on the outside of the building. This funding will be matched, so we're hoping that it's going to be enough to cover the condition assessment. And Reverend Sal Mancini is here from the church to answer any questions that I can't.
Great, thanks, Mary. Any questions from council members?
I have a question, but I'll just start with a round of encouragement. It's so great when we see masonry buildings coming in here for proper consultant review. Sometimes masonry buildings get repaired before without a consultant, and when the mortar selection isn't correct, it can really damage a building. So I'm excited about that. But the question is, I'm seeing some of the ornamentation at the parapet looks like it's precast concrete, probably. Is this a terracotta? But maybe on the front facade there's some terracotta. Mary, do you know what some of the materials are? Is it a cast stone or?
I think the exterior facade on the Main Street side, is well, brick masonry and I think a little cast stone, but I'm looking. I would have to look at the National Register. Actually, the NR nomination probably doesn't really.
That's fine. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's totally fine. Just more out of curiosity than anything.
Okay.
I can find out.
Thanks, Beth. Paul, I see your hands up.
Yeah, my question is, which comes first? Do we need a conditions assessment, or should we really jump into having somebody tackle, construction documents for addressing these parapets and the actual repointing and going through? We kind of know that this is really a critical issue. And I would like to see them really just jump in and get something that they can go out to bid with, rather than saying, hey, your parapet is falling apart. Because I've seen it in other cases where, it was dealing with some churches and schools where they've had these kind of conditions in their parapet crumbling apart. And the solution was, well, it's too difficult. We're just going to strip it down 3 feet and put an aluminum cap on, and that's it, because it's falling down. So the conditions are pretty obvious that they really need to get moving with this. And it seems as if, though, if they can just jump right into that, that phase, I think would be more advantageous for the long-term preservation of this building versus stepping back and saying, gee, what's really wrong? It's, Beth, I think you can comment on what you see in the photos is pretty telling already. That
They, yeah, and can I just jump in? Yeah, they can certainly do that. Sometimes we do recommend that they take that step back, but I think in a case like, I mean, because sometimes sometimes somebody will come in for an HRF or a roof replacement, and then we realize it's not just the roof they need something else. So let's take a look at, but this is what I love having the council here for, is if they see that something is really ready to go with, we could certainly have the applicant just jump right in with plans and specifications to support an HRF grant application. I don't know what that would involve as far as tabling this application and having them just come back in January, or revising the motion. That's a point that I'm not quite sure. And actually consulting with the with the applicant himself, just to make sure that that's what they're ready to do.
I wouldn't mind jumping in. I guess I'm a little bit mixed on that. I mean, there's a potential safety issue with the parapet, so that's important, and it's obvious that it needs work. But at the same time, or in the same breath, I should say, it is important in order to tackle that, to understand what the priority of all the projects near it are. If you're pointing one area, sometimes it makes sense, to point more if you've got scaffolding up. So in this case, it's almost like the ideal wish list of initial priorities is a conditions assessment plus a stabilization of that parapet. I mean, I think, to me, because it does appear that there's quite a bit of deferred maintenance on the building between pointing and roofing, that would be a big nut to try to grab all of that for for a design project without them sort of thinking about the funding ahead of time. So I can understand that need for priority and costs to sort of plan that too. So maybe we can, maybe again with this one, the answer is to structure the RFP, and obviously it's important to hear what everybody's thinking, but one option is, structure the RFP with the base of the conditions assessment with the sort of ad alternate of stabilization of that parapet in particular, a design piece of that. I don't know, what does everybody else think?
Mary, can we do that, or is this strictly a survey and planning?
Well, you can vote on this motion, and so it would be a condition assessment, but often applicants do build in plans and specifications for the priority need, and that's fine to do, and that's still pre-development. That doesn't fall under HRF, so it's still a survey and planning eligible activity. So I think that would make everything.
That would be the priority need for sure.
I see 4 sets of hands up. So Beth Burgess?
Thanks, Tom. I'm in agreement with Beth Ackley and the structure of the RFP that you suggest. I mean, ultimately, we want that LRPP, the Long Range Preservation Plan, out of this condition assessment so we know what's coming next down the pike. And I don't think we would get that with just plans and specifications. So I'm in agreement there.
Margaret?
Sorry, just for Mary. So if it came down to it, we could have a conditions assessment and HRF going at the same time, correct?
Yes, yes, but this particular project would be the condition assessment with plans and specs for a priority need, which isn't HRF necessarily.
That's right. But if it became urgent, like, I don't know what is the timeline in your opinion for this condition? It's a huge building, so.
Right. But, well, right, sure, if they got plans and specs, you know, in the next 2 months or, you know, whatever, they could apply for an HRF before they technically closed out the survey and planning grant.
Good,
Yes,
yeah, because I know with the school I was working on, if we hadn't done the HRF first, our building would have fallen down before we got to the conditions assessment. You know what I mean? I don't think it's in that condition, but just wondering. So you think about 3 months for the conditions
Oh,
assessment?
I don't know, I was just throwing that out. No, usually it's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I mean, if they could jump in and look at the parapet while they're doing sort of the condition assessment and if they happen to complete the plans and specifications prior to the entire project, the applicant could certainly take those and move forward before, you know, finishing everything else.
Excellent, thank you.
Sarah Nelson, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm listening to all of the comments made by Paul and by Beth, and both Beths and Margaret. I'm thinking back to a project I had 25 years ago that was a building in very deteriorated shape at the parapet, but still needed the whole condition assessment. And along the lines of what people are expressing, what the study report did was also, rather than full plans and specifications for the restoration, it provided the emergency stabilization package for what needed to happen to buy the time to allow for the kind of budget setting. And we're talking about sort of full restoration of the parapet. And I just want to say there's one other option, which is stabilization of conditions and mothballing until the time that the whole restoration scope involved with the parapet, including the roof or whatever else, the masonry walls, can be undertaken.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to punt to Beth Ackley and Paul again to just go round robin here to talk this through and see what we can do to help. So go ahead, Beth.
I like the idea of Sarah's suggestion of opening it up as a stabilization. And Mary's language that is often used of the priority need, drawing plans and specs for the priority need. For a parapet, I mean, it does look like there's already some bracing up there, and it's unclear. It clearly needs work. It's unclear how currently stable it is. I'm just trying to think of how to give, not have the RFP be biddable. And I think maybe the answer is to go with the stabilization route. That's my suggestion or my thought, because that does give the most flexibility for doing a larger project down the line and maybe putting it all into an HRF. The only risk is that if that takes a lot of years to get to, but maybe that's a smaller project, but without any more information, that's probably the best we can do at this point. I don't know, Paul, what do you think?
That seems to make sense. The biggest challenge I find with a lot of the nonprofits is that they don't have a lot of money to go, and do things piecemeal. It's sort of, you don't have the funds to do it twice. So if a stabilization is going to have to be basically redone in order to do the final work, that becomes an extra impediment. So it's sort of, how do we get them to the point where whatever they do is actually, going to be a permanent part of the ultimate project, rather than a stopgap measure. Spend $60,000 on, a temporary thing, and it's going to cost you 120. which actually ends up being 180 in the end because you spent, a short-term stopgap measure. So just trying to figure out, it's a defined need that there's a big issue there, which could be contributing to the other water issues that they're having inside and all of that. So everything is related, but
So it seems to me that the issue that we're having in our discussion is we don't know the condition of that parapet wall. So Mary, what if, or let me rephrase that, could it be structured such that we go with the stabilization, but if they find that they're in dire need of emergency monies, can they come in for that emergency HRF grant?
Yes, yes.
I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how to expedite this for them. And I agree with Paul, a lot of these entities don't have deep pockets, but each grant is going to have, it's going to require some kind of money.
Okay.
Sarah?
So I'm not clear. Are we then saying we're going to do a condition assessment with a focus on the parapet? And if the finding, once the team is involved, is that they've got an emergency condition, that a budget is developed, specifications are developed, and the work is bid through an HRF program? Is that what you're suggesting, the path, Tom?
I don't know. I mean, I can honestly say I've only stood next to a parapet wall and I've never studied one, so.
Okay. We're all trying to help them get the best value for their money.
So Mary, is this a matching grant? So they would have.
They are providing a match. So it's a $40,000. Well, that's the budget right now. Yeah.
Right. So to Sarah, Beth, and Paul, can $40,000 on a facade assessment with a parapet focus, is that enough? I mean, it sounds to me like just the scaffolding could cost a bundle.
A stabilization could be from the roof. And it wouldn't necessarily need scaffolding.
Okay.
And again, it's so dependent on, just getting up there and seeing the conditions. I mean, I think in my mind, the first thing that this needs a comprehensive conditions assessment, certainly an exterior or building envelope conditions assessment, no matter what. And then within that, any items deemed urgent need to be addressed urgently, to design that really depends on what that looks like. I think we have the emergency HRF funding piece there. It's just how we recommend that design of that piece in the middle be packaged. Is there another little emergency survey and planning grant that they could come in for? And so it's this 3-step thing and not put it in here? Maybe that's the way to do it?
That's possible. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sounds very complicated, but if it does become an emergency and they're already, on the record with doing this, perhaps it could ease it through. I don't know.
Right. And outside of an emergency, that's generally the natural progression. Let's look at this particular need, boom, and now let's get a grant for the plans and specs. But in an emergency situation, that could be compressed. It doesn't necessarily have to take those regimented steps.
And I know Paul's concern when we first started discussing this is that, if there's no obvious path to this potentially dangerous condition being addressed, then it might not get addressed. But if there's sort of this written out path that we've at least talked about, perhaps that would ease that.
That seems to make sense.
So Mary, grant-wise, you'd be comfortable with an emergency coming in from left field?
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
emergencies aren't great, but yeah, but no, of course, we're definitely ready to help. And also, you know, if and when, you know, the initial award is made, that's just the start of it. You know, we will, you know, work with the applicant, you know, to help them with the RFP and to help them to focus based on this conversation, and you know, try to get them on the right path and to follow that path.
Right. Sarah, you have another question, or is your hand still up?
I don't have another question.
Okay. So it sounds like we're going to proceed with the application as submitted, with the understanding that if an emergency really is identified, then they're going to come back to Mary for an additional grant. Is that what I understand? Okay. And they're going to focus on the entire building envelope. Okay. Any other questions or comments from anybody? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a roll call vote. Beth Ackley,
Aye.
Beth Burgess,
Aye.
Paul Butkus.
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber,
Aye.
Leah Glazer,
Aye.
Christine Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Sportman,
Aye.
and Walter Woodward.
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Good luck.
Great, thank you. Thank you for all your advice.
Next item on the agenda is 5B5. The Historic Preservation Council votes to recommend the award of a survey and planning grant funded by the Community Investment Act of the State of Connecticut to the below listed applicant in the amount shown. All grant guidelines and state requirements shall be met by the below listed applicant upon receipt of a grant as administered by the Department of Economic and Community Development. Staff recommends the application for funding. Applicant, Miracle Temple Church of New London, Connecticut, Incorporated. Project, consulting services of a CFR qualified architect and appropriate team to prepare a condition assessment of the Miracle Temple Church building dated 1868, located at 45 Broad Street in New London. Grant amount for $20,000. May I have a motion to move this to the table for discussion? Come on.
So moved.
Second,
Sarah,
Christine.
All right. So Sarah Nelson motion and Christine for second. Okay. And Mary, discussion?
Sure. So staff does recommend approval of this application. This application came in last spring during the non-matching, the match waiver period. However, again, this is a fairly large building. They are asking for a condition assessment for the whole building, but as you can see, and as I discussed with the applicant, obviously the steeple and the stained glass windows are presenting an obvious need for examination. So even though there's not a match required, that the church is prepared to provide matching funds. But sort of over the last two conversations we've had about conditions assessments, we might want to focus on the obvious needs, which are the steeple and the windows themselves, I believe, are in okay shape. It's just that there's they need to be tightened up, and the wood surrounds need to be restored. Marissa Davis, I believe, is here to answer any questions, but I'm open to comments and questions.
I have a comment and thought. this type of granite church in New London is not uncommon, and I've worked on some before. And this is sort of common with granite in general, but granite tends to really hold the moisture in, and I don't always recommend this for all conditions assessments, but for granite in particular, I think it's really important to get a lift, an aerial lift to inspect if you're really going to understand the extent of damage, particularly on the granite top, top of the bell tower. It's really important to be able to tap on the masonry and understand how much of it is delaminated behind it. We can do drone surveys, and with many buildings that gets us a long way, but with granite buildings, I think we could miss a lot of potential hidden conditions there. So right away, when you add the aerial lift, you're adding $5,000 or $6,000. So it changes the overall budget of the assessment by quite a bit.
Mhm.
And does that assessment, Beth, go all the way up the steeple as well? I mean, are
Yeah.
they that
Oh,
size
yeah.
of a lift?
Yeah. I mean, these granite churches are so beautiful, and the granite is such a durable material, but it just hides stuff in the middle of the walls. It's an unfortunate thing. So I think in general, and it sounds like there's the church is willing to chip in, but I do think the $20,000 is going to be quite low, especially when you're getting into beyond building envelope, if you're talking about interior as well.
I'll kind of agree. We had the case in Waterbury where they had to take the stone spires off of the church, south of Route 8, because it just wasn't able to go through that, stabilization or anything. So it's a shame when that happens. So if we can kind of focus on maintaining, what's there by focusing our attention for this grant on that particular project, and hopefully the windows as well, if they can, keep that part of the envelope going through. That would be probably the highest priority. And then typically with all of the slate roofs, I see it a lot. I've reviewed a lot of churches over the last 20 years, and there's typically just a lack of annual maintenance. So it could be that there's just, while you have the lift out there, we're looking at the steeple, that they go up and they replace the missing slates, and that'll go a long way of addressing things or assessing how much the condition really is, requiring at this point maybe a new roof. But if you have the lift out there to get to the top of the steeple, they can actually visually inspect the slate and make a cursory determination of something that can be patched, or the percentage just is so high that they're looking at doing a re-roofing project.
Sarah Nelson had to step out for a work meeting, so she's left the meeting, just so everybody knows. I guess I'm going to leave this discussion in Beth and Paul's hands, not knowing where to take it.
Well, maybe the question is for Mary, is it better to say, or maybe it's a combination, but focus the conditions assessment on the steeple and windows, and just call it that as a base, and then have an additional set of pricing that could be for other pieces that the church could then and you don't even have to allocate what's where. You just get the pricing for it, then you can determine it, but just sort of have those priced within the same thing as separate items, so that, or maybe break it up into three. Maybe it's those two areas of the building envelope is A, B is the rest of the building envelope, and C is the interior piece. and just see where the prices come and see what, what the church can do and decide from there what the project is.
Mhm. No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And especially with the smaller budgets, we always recommend that the scope be more focused or parsed out. Yes. So that's really, that's a great, thank you for that, that picture.
Well, and not only that, this is a large structure. So there's
It
not going
is.
to be any small
Yeah.
project on this large structure.
Right.
Okay. Paul, any final thoughts? Or
No,
any?
I think that makes perfect sense if we can kind of list the priorities and take it from there.
Okay. Any other council members? All right, hearing none, we'll take a roll call vote to approve the application. Beth Ackley,
Aye.
Beth Burgess,
Aye.
Paul Butkus.
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber,
Aye.
Leah Glazer,
Aye.
Christine Nelson,
Aye.
Sarah Nelson had to leave, Sarah Sportman,
Aye.
and Walter Woodward.
Aye.
Very good, motion carries.
Great. Thank you so much.
Next item on the agenda is 5B6. The Historic Preservation Council votes to award a stewardship relief grant funded by the Community Investment Act of the State of Connecticut to the below listed applicant in the amount shown. All grant guidelines and state requirements shall be met by the below listed applicant upon receipt of a grant as administered by the Department of Economic and Community Development. The purpose of the grant, basic utility costs per grant guidelines. The applicant, Middlesex County Historical Society. Amount requested, $1,000. May I have a motion to bring this to the table for discussion?
So moved, Beth Burgess.
And a second?
Paul?
Second. Go ahead, Paul.
Was that Walter or Paul for the second?
I
Paul.
yield to Paul.
All right.
Great. Thank you. Okay.
Just point of clarification, the document that was submitted had $1 million amount written on the page. Has that been corrected?
What? Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute.
You're right, it does say $1 million, and I missed that.
It's a period though, so.
Yeah.
It's a period though.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
$50,000.
I will take that period off, but yes, it's 1,000.000. Sorry about that. But we do recommend the application. And we had one of these at the last meeting. We are discontinuing this program after the first of the year. There's a deadline of December 10th for any organizations to get their last applications in. We developed this program at the onset of the shutdown due to COVID-19, just as a way of helping stewards of historic properties continue to pay the necessary bills that protect the properties. Because of the shutdown, so many organizations just lost income, drastically and quickly. And we just didn't want to see people, not paying the heating bill or the water bill or things that you really need to keep up with to protect your property, beyond, larger restoration and preservation costs. So we do recommend approval of this application. I don't believe anybody is here from the Middlesex County Historical Society, but I can answer questions about the program or anything else.
Great. I see two hands up. Margaret?
Sorry. Just that the application checklist isn't completed. Does that need to be done?
It's what? I'm sorry?
It's not completed. I just wondered if it needs to be done before we submit this. Or...
What's
on page 6 of 6? Okay, you know how they normally say not applicable or they've included the material?
Oh, yeah, I did see that. I'm sorry. Yeah. And the catch-all at the bottom of the staff notes, although, yes, that checklist should have been actually filled out, but my statement at the bottom of the staff notes is your assurance that everything has been submitted, all of the receipts, you know. But yeah, you're right, it should have been checked off
But that's
nevertheless.
fine. I didn't see the note, so thank you.
Oh, okay.
Christine Nelson?
I thought this was a great program overall. I sat on a couple of committees, a house committee for a historic house and historical society, and I noticed that had they been eligible, that their expenses were just about this amount, like $1,200 to $1,500 in an overall poor period for them to be, you know, raising money and so forth for other things like than this. Neither of them were actually eligible. One was not a nonprofit; it's a foundation. Does that make sense?
Oh, but a lot of foundations are organized as 501c3 nonprofits, but they weren't.
I don't know. They insisted that they weren't eligible, so I didn't know anything more about the legal standing. But I thought that was interesting. And then because they sort of and we can talk about this offline. And then the other was a historical society. Their building is not on a register.
Well, that is a requirement. So to be eligible for the application, the applicant needs to be a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit. Yeah. But the resource that we are in question does need to be listed on the state or national register. Yeah, it has to be a designated resource. So
okay, so I thought that was interesting, and I was surprised to learn that the building actually had been changed so much over time that it wasn't eligible for the register. But there you go. I just thought those were some interesting shortcomings while I was trying to sell everybody on, hey, there's some emergency money out there, you know, take advantage. But anyway, overall, it was a great program, and I wish more people had applied. And I think that it's something that maybe ought to be revisited in, you know, obviously, hopefully we won't have such global dire circumstances, but just in the future with economic downturns or other economic circumstances, this was a real gift and a boost to some organizations. So thank you for organizing it.
Good. I hope it had some impact. And there's nothing to stop us. I mean, we give the institutional support for capacity building grant, which are obviously much larger, but sort of serve the same purpose. There's nothing to stop us from in the future just developing a tiny grant program just to help with, you know, certain operating costs for nonprofits across the state, for sure.
Any other thoughts, council members? Questions from council members? No? All right, hearing none, I'll take a roll call vote to approve the application. Beth Ackley?
Aye.
Beth Burgess?
Aye.
Paul Butkus?
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber?
Aye.
Leah Glazer? Christine Nelson?
Aye.
Sarah Nelson has left. Sarah Sportman?
Aye.
And Walter Woodward?
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Jonathan, do you know if Leah is still with us, or has she?
She left the meeting.
I'm sorry?
She sent a message that she left the meeting.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is 6B1. State Register nomination for the Anna and Walter B. Spencer House located at 252 Wakely Avenue, Ansonia, to the State Register of Historic Places. The Historic Preservation Council votes to list the Anna and Walter B. Spencer House located at 252 Wakely Avenue, Ansonia, to the State Register of Historic Places. May I have a motion to bring this to the table for discussion?
So moved, Margaret.
A second?
Second, Sarah.
And a discussion.
Oh, okay, thanks. Hi, so this is Marina Wisniewski. Staff recommends approval of listing of the Anna and Walter B. Spencer House located at 252 Wakely Avenue in Ansonia under Criterion 1 at the local level as a part of the suburban development of Ansonia, as well as under Criterion 2 at the local level as an intact example of a four-square plan single-family home. Alterations have been minimal, the most noticeable being the replacement of the majority of the original windows. However, it retains its integrity of location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association with the area as it developed into a middle-class neighborhood located along a transportation route. Hector Martinez, owner of the property, is here to help answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Marina. Questions from council members?
Tom, I just wanted to note that Leah left something in the chat.
Yeah, I don't have my chat up. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Deborah actually let me know that.
Oh, I see. Comments for the Spencer House. And yeah, I knew Leah was going to bring that up because of what we just talked about with Jenny. So, you know, it's what I will say to the council is that it's not a hard and fast rule that you can't mention anything before the period of significance or date of significance. I actually find that, you know, weaving in a little bit of previous context, whether it be, you know, just a quick paragraph, helps to introduce the reader into the context of the property, you know, and to help kind of round that out a little bit. So it's not like you can't talk about it, but to Jenny's point, you know, you don't want to go on for 4 pages and then only talk about the period of significance for a page. So that's just what I would say to that comment.
I would add, you can weave essential background information into the narrative, but what I was getting at in my talk was you don't lead with a whole statement on general background that's unrelated. That's all.
Okay, Christine?
I was just going to say, one of the things when I'm reading things, I so often say to myself, so what? What's the point of that? So I think you can weave anything in as long as you make it relevant, no matter when it happens.
Yeah.
I give it, it's called the
I agree,
what
Christine.
test.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and actually, I think that this nomination actually makes a very good job discussing the argument of the development of the Foursquare. You know, she weaves in some, you know, some national trends that are going on at the same time while bringing it home to a very local level.
I guess I wish it would just start off with this house is dated such and such in such a style and the parcel is X number of square feet in size. Because I so badly want to know that right from the get-go before I get into it. And I actually only found the 0.24 acre size, I don't know, several paragraphs down. But that's just me.
No, that's, you know what, so we can add that to that executive kind of summary paragraph right at the outset. You know, we can just, you know, it'll be a little repetitious, but it's good if you're looking for an overall summary. So I'll add that as a comment.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about our agenda. I'm always like, where's the address?
So you'd rather have the address up front on our agendas and then the name of the property?
No, your action item's the only one with a street address.
Oh.
We can add addresses to the agenda. That's not a problem at all. That's easy.
I didn't want to say it in case somebody said, you know, it's in the materials.
Well, but to build on that, sometimes, not all the time, I'll sit there and Google them really fast to find out where they are because I don't know these towns or these individual neighborhoods. And so for like the Music Mountain, you know, I Googled it and, you know, there was a beautiful photograph from above. So I thought it was good. I mean, I support the nomination. That my little minor comment was just, you know, my thoughts. Any other comments from council members? No? Okay, hearing none, I'll take a roll call vote to approve the nomination. Beth Ackley,
Aye.
Beth Burgess,
Aye.
Paul Butkus.
Aye.
I will abstain. Margaret Faber.
Aye.
Leah has left. Christine Nelson.
Aye.
Sarah has left. Sarah Sportman
Aye.
and Walter Woodward.
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Hector, for staying on. Congratulations.
Next item on the agenda is threatened properties. SEPA updates with Todd Levine.
Good morning, everyone. I have a couple of quick updates for you. Norwalk we've been in negotiations to try to get back to Norwalk. The problem with Norwalk now is that the Attorney General's office is not confident that they're going to bring suit. The problem is that because it's built right against wetlands and the floodplain, they can't build out, and it's already out of compliance because it's built into the setback. And the problem is we're trying to find a solution where we can compromise and keep at least some of the exterior walls, as well as the older portion of the building, which you may recall was the chimney, the floors, and the foundation. Well, now the city said they're not going to allow building on that foundation. They're not convinced of its structural integrity. So we're kind of back at a position where there's very little we can do. If we go forward with the suit, even if we win, and then a municipality says no, then we just wasted a lot of time. We're trying to navigate now to get a clear answer from the municipality on exactly what they will accept and not accept, but there's politics involved and there's personalities involved. Apparently, hard to believe Andy Glazer rubs some people the wrong way in town. But we're still trying to find a solution, and we will know by the end of the month because the demolition delay runs out December 30th. But this might be a loss, so I want to prepare you for that. The second thing is the Grange. The deal with the Attorney General's office that we did not sign on for was that they were going to put it in the Preservation News, Preservation Connecticut's newsletter for 2 months and consider offers, but then have the ability to decline any offers. So it is now in Preservation News. The 2-month time is ticking. My understanding from the locals is that somebody is going to put in an offer for the asking price. And my understanding from the municipalities, they're going to decline. So it puts us in a bit of a pickle. Not so much with the Attorney General's office, because as I mentioned last month, they are disinclined to file suit. But the municipality is also in for a steep grant to our office for review, which would be an adverse effect. And that is going to be problematic to navigate because we've done this before. You may remember a number of years ago with UConn and the Brown houses. They had come in for funding. Initially, we had started our review, and then SEPA happened. So at any rate, we have to figure out what's going to happen with the Grange, but that too may end up being a loss because the Attorney General's office, I think, is disinclined to move forward. But what a great segue to talk about UConn. And the newest threat to the Brown houses. I'll hand it over to my colleague, unless anybody has any questions about Bridgewater or Norwalk, to Kathy.
Okay, thank you, Todd. I am not so much giving an update, but I just wanted to share some information that I thought was important with the HPC. For those of you that remember, about 5 years ago, we were engaged with the project at UConn that involved some demolition of either Faculty Row or the Brown houses. The HPC was heavily involved with that as well. Just before Thanksgiving, Laura Cruikshank, who is the senior architect for the University of Connecticut, contacted our office requesting an opportunity to meet with us regarding the agreement document that was signed regarding that demolition. Since that time, I was reviewing the environmental monitor, which is posted online, and it is clear that the University of Connecticut is looking to construct some new dormitories, and it would appear that they are at the location of one of the still standing Brown houses. So I'm kind of putting 2 and 2 together to understand what her meeting may potentially be about. But having said that, I don't know for sure. It hasn't happened. But, you know, I just, for full transparency, because I know that we had a lot of discussions last time, I just wanted to let everybody know that she has requested this meeting, and I am certainly happy to answer any questions or provide updates as we have them.
Great, thanks, Kathy. Yep, Margaret?
Just a question, because I was really involved with the whole Yukon thing. So there was an MOU with the Connecticut Trust, you know, to retain those 2 houses, which they haven't been maintaining, obviously. And I'm just wondering, you know, what happens with that if they decide to move forward with the dormitories?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of uncharted territories. You know, I don't know what we can hold them to. They've also Laura has also requested a meeting with Preservation CT. So again, I'm not sure how this is going to play out, and Margaret, I know you have a lot of interest in it. I'm more than happy if you want to have another discussion offline. I'm happy to talk about it some more, or with anybody else who does. But yeah, at this time, the only thing I can say is, you know, I looked at the environmental monitor, saw that this was posted there, and that she's requested a meeting.
Okay, thanks for the update.
Sure.
Walter, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I'm the agreement that they arrived at after Margaret went to war, and many people went to war with her for a long time, is that they were going to save these buildings and preserve them. So this hasn't happened, and now they want to renege on that. Isn't there any recourse against that?
I want to sit down with the agreement document and look at it in detail. I don't know at this point. I mean, all I can tell you is, you know, where our office stands on this. You know, yeah, we made this agreement document. We allowed the prior demolition to happen with the understanding that they were going to retain these houses. I'm in a frustrating position right now. I don't know how it's going to play out, and I really don't know how far, where legally we're going to fall or stand on this.
Christine, question? No? And Margaret, do you have another question, or is your hand still up? No? Any other questions? All right. Todd, anything else? Thank you, Kathy.
No.
No?
Thanks.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the report on State Historic Preservation Office by Jonathan.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. How is everyone doing? Just really briefly wanted to report on something an aspect of the office that you guys are not typically heavily involved in, but I thought you might find interesting, which is our the recently passed federal infrastructure bill. So I'm sure that some of you are aware that in addition to the primarily state-funded financial incentive programs that come before the council each month, SHPO also plays a critical role in the federal regulatory process as well. Consultation with SHPO is a mandatory component of the National Environmental Protection Act, otherwise known as NEPA, which applies to all projects under the direct control of the federal government, as well as the National Historic Preservation Act, which was mentioned earlier today, which requires that SHPO perform a compliance review of every federally funded, licensed, or permitted project. The purpose of these historic preservation review processes, I'm sure many of you are aware, is to ensure that federal or federally assisted project proponents take into consideration the potential impacts of their projects on significant historic resources. And the goal of consultation with our office is consistently to identify cultural resources within a project area, identify potential impacts to those resources, and to find ways to avoid harm to historic properties. And if impacts can't be avoided, then SHPO works with the project proponent to minimize or mitigate the adverse effects. So with the recent passage of the federal infrastructure bill, states can anticipate substantial increases in federal project funding in the coming months and years, which is going to translate to hundreds, if not thousands, of additional regulatory review requests for our office. Just some preliminary numbers that we're getting based on formula funding alone. Connecticut looks like it will be receiving about 34% more funding for highways and bridge projects on an annual basis over the next 5 years. And then the states will also be able to apply for additional competitive grant funding as part of this larger infrastructure initiative. So the legislation also includes billions of additional federal dollars for roadway safety projects, resiliency measures, climate change mitigation, public transportation improvements, airport facilities, and passenger and freight rail. So needless to say, as a majority of these federally funded projects will be coming through SHPO as part of the above mentioned review processes, we're going to be very busy in the coming months and years. So I just wanted to kind of let you know where we were with that. SHPO has been evaluating its staffing needs and is in the process of requesting additional positions to augment our review capabilities. This will ensure that we can continue to maintain the high level of service that we provide through both our state and federal programs, that we meet our federally mandated regulatory requirements, and that we're also well positioned to handle the anticipated long-term workload increases associated with this new legislation. So I just sort of wanted to briefly touch on the legislation that has recently been passed and how we're responding to that. I also just wanted to mention that appointments to the HPC is still an ongoing process. We've just recently received several names of potential candidates, and I hope to be moving forward, reaching out and getting some new additional appointments shortly. And I wanted to especially thank Christine Nelson, who has been forwarding me several candidates recently. So does anybody have any questions on either one of those items?
2 hands are up.
Oh, sure.
Beth and Walter. Beth, you go first.
Sure. Jonathan, thank you so much for keeping us in the loop on that. I mean, I've been in the back of my mind wondering how this is going to affect our industry, and that's really helpful to understand how it's going to impact SHPO's office. Just out of curiosity, like, what have you come up with for numbers of staff that you might think you need to add, or maybe you can't share that, but I'm just curious.
Sure. It's looking like probably at least 2, possibly 3 new additional staff.
Yeah.
It's a huge, it's a huge change to the office because we're a staff of 8 or 9. So, yeah, it's going to be a big workload over the next few years. But I'm hoping that with these additional folks, we'll be able to handle it no problem.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you guys are staying ahead of it and thinking.
Trying.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, sure.
Walter, you're on mute. Walter, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Muted, Walt.
So sorry. I'm thinking that this burst of infrastructure is also going to place a great demand on Sarah Sportman and maybe Kathy Labadia, just as fallout from the process. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there is a mechanism to fund the potential burden that's going to come Sarah's way. And I wonder if that's anything that there's relief or some support that can come out of the funding from your office to support Sarah if that happens. I don't know how that works, but Sarah, and also I don't mean to be speaking for you. I'm just I see your job getting intensely busier overnight.
Well, I think that, on my end, I think some of the biggest issues are going to come from the collections that come out of this. And those are going to end up probably at the Office of State Archaeology, and UConn is continuing to squeeze us tighter and tighter in terms of collection space. And, I'm not sure. I've been trying to keep people aware of what might be coming down the pipeline, just in terms of some of the big projects that we've had in the last couple of years. But nobody seems terribly worried about it. So I'm not sure how that's going to go. But if, I'm not sure how these processes work, but I know that in other states and in other situations, they've been able to get curation funds out of big federal projects. And if there was some way to help offset that with UConn, that might be something to look into, because it's going to become a huge problem in a few years, I think.
Yeah, Walter, just to address your question from another angle. One of the earlier, before the infrastructure bill that recently passed was whittled down in Congress to its current state, an earlier amendment to the bill, I believe, proposed some additional funding for the SHPOs, but it didn't move forward with the legislation. However, there is, in one version of the current social spending bill that's working its way through Congress, there is a potential for some increased funding for SHPOs. Whether or not that will make it through to the final iteration yet remains to be seen, but we'll certainly keep you updated as we find out more.
Kathy,
Thank you, Tom. Well, to your, I would never forget my partner, Sarah, and the responsibility her office is going to have in all of this. Some of the things that we're doing to help, certainly our office being able to hire additional staff. We're hoping that one of those additional staff will be an archaeologist, so that will definitely help myself out. The preservation CT, we've been moving forward with HPC's approval of hiring an archaeology circuit rider. So hopefully that person will be on board soon. It's going to be a junior level person, but certainly we'll be able to provide assistance to both me, Sarah, and archaeology in general across the state. And then, finally, to the concern that Sarah raised, which is the one that's always in my mind, is, we take a lot of stuff out of the ground, and how do we deal with it afterwards? And in my mind, I've always been thinking of that as project specific, tack-ons, because, I think there are certain projects that are going to create larger collections in the end, and probably the smart way to handle it is within those projects. I like to be proactive, but I think in this case, it might be smarter to just make them project specific.
Thank you, Kathy. That's great.
Jonathan, I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
Does some of the monies, you listed a bunch of items that these monies will support. Does any of it support housing?
I would have to look at the legislation specifically, but that's a good question.
I don't know if housing comes under infrastructure, but I just throw that out to
yeah,
see.
I would have to look. I don't know off the top of my head, but Kathy has her hand up.
Yeah, so there is, I think everybody thinks of infrastructure as really roads and bridges and rail. There are a lot of other components to it, including broadband, and there are components for housing. So in addition to new construction, a lot of rehabilitating existing housing. And that is part of the infrastructure bill. As part of the Build Back Better bill, which, is still in flux, there is potentially another large source of funding that will go into affordable housing.
Great. Christine?
As a council, is there anything that we could be doing to help with lobbying efforts? John?
A good question, Christine. Off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that, but what I'd like to do is we could certainly talk about it as a staff if there's anything we might need, and could let you know at a subsequent meeting or via email.
Terrific, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just jump in and share that. Kathy brought this, has been tracking the infrastructure bill from the beginning on behalf of Environmental Review. And so this was brought to our attention down the pike, and we had meetings with David Lehman, the commissioner, about this need. He has met with his colleague commissioner at the DOT. So the three positions that we are looking at right now, one is going to be funded from our current funding, but the other two are not, we don't have funds, and nor does the agency have general funds for. So he is going to be going to the governor asking for specific funding for those positions. So I feel like we are supported, and the enhanced workload is noted in terms of administration. So both from DECD and from DOT, together they have a pretty strong voice, because if we don't keep up with the work, then projects get halted. and that just can't happen. So there's not really a choice that we have in the matter if there's not enough people to do the work that is, to manage the workload, which is going to be, seriously increased. So as that moves forward, if we hit roadblocks, we'll definitely keep you informed, because it's always great to have you guys as, being willing to make calls and have a voice on our behalf.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Liz. I see, Christine, is your hand still up or do you have a new question?
It's still up, but I will say, I recall that, way back in the day when under the National Housing Act, back in the whenever it was 40s and 50s, you guys tell me, but there was quite a counterpart of historic preservation at the same time. I mean, it was all, urban renewal and demolition of blight, but there was a lot of money that went into historic preservation as a part of that. So I just wonder if there might be an echo of history, the good part of history of the preservation part of it, not the displacement of poor people. But anyway, is there any money in it for you guys?
Well, as I said, maybe in the Build Back Better bill, the social spending bill, but I don't. It's if anything, it's not gonna, it's not gonna be office altering amounts of money. I think it's a pretty limited amount.
Kathy, additional?
Yeah, I just wanted to, Christine, your questions, I always love getting support from HPC or anybody else who's willing to support us. And I, from your background in particular, this infrastructure bill, while a lot of it will be going through the DOT and federal agencies, there's also the opportunity for municipalities, COGS, to apply directly for some of this funding. And while I don't worry about the federal agencies knowing what their responsibilities are, I am concerned about when they start going directly to the municipalities and the COGS and what types of guidance is going to be going out to them, only because the wheels are moving really fast on this. So I think, your support within the planning community is really, I don't know if it's worth, and I'm hoping that once these things start rolling out, that the DOT is going to take a lead role in providing some guidance and assistance. But if not, maybe setting up some informational sessions, encouraging other municipalities and the COGS to send stuff to our office as early as possible to get that ball rolling, not wait to the last minute. And, as always, don't circumvent environmental law, because that always just causes bigger problems later on.
All right. Anything else? Okay. Next on the agenda is the report of museum properties. Liz?
Hi, I gotta love the word circumvent. Such a good state word to use. So let me give you a quick update, and I'm going to start with something that's not specifically related to our museums, but relates to what I shared with you last month about the Connecticut Cultural Fund operating support grant that Connecticut Humanities is administering with state funds. And just as a reminder, the program offers unmatched grants of at least $5,000, so there's no matching requirement, to history, arts, and cultural nonprofits, and the total grant pool is $16 million. So just wanted to let you know that the application period has closed and that right now there's over 700 applicants. So Connecticut Humanities is working to do a first pass of eligibility and to create the data forms that are going to be a requirement for applicants to complete prior to receiving their awards, because this is going to be a big portion of this is to collect data on these 700 organizations who hopefully will all be deemed eligible to receive funding. We're going to be meeting next week to do a review of applicants that we may have questions about. As a team, the Office of the Arts is going to be working with Connecticut Humanities on that. But a significant portion of these funds will be going out to historical societies, small museums, and they often are the keepers of our history widely across the state. So it's really exciting. More to come on that with announcements, grant award announcements. We hope will come out before Christmas. As you also know, we've been working to fill the open position of museum curator that opened when Meg McBride retired in August. And in an interesting twist, which I have not had to deal with yet in working at the state, but we have a mandatory reemployment CBAC candidate who was interested in the job. This means somebody who is qualified by CBAC to come back into a job or a similar job that they have left, and they get essentially right of first refusal. So I met with this person. I cannot name the person yet because it's not confirmed, but she has worked at the museums in the past 15 years, and I feel sure that she is well qualified for the open position. So we're working on confirmation on this from the Attorney General's office. The confirmation comes in the form of a stipulated agreement, and I expect, I was told that we would be receiving that this week. So once we receive that, all the candidates who have applied will receive an email basically saying that the position has been filled with a mandatory reemployment CBAC candidate. This person will start the first week of January. So that's the news on that front. And that is kind of the way things can roll in the state for those of you who have never worked for the state. A couple of other specific items of interest for the museums. So I want you all to breathe together and go, not again. Substantial completion of the Prudence Crandall Museum that was supposed to be on November 12th. Did not happen, was not approved by David Barkin, and who is the state architect and team because of issues that were still identified as needing to be addressed before SHPO reassumes control of the building. And these include parts that are needed to make the brand new HVAC system function properly. So I'm feeling really great about that right now. The parts are on back order for 4 weeks. I have been told that they really think substantial completion will happen before January 1st. So maybe it will happen before January 1st. In the meantime, Kronenberger still has control of the building. And I will keep you updated. In good news, though, we did get approval from the state fire marshal on a collection storage plan that Kathy Caldwell-Varda prepared for us. So we're moving ahead to plan to empty out the storage pods starting in January once we assume control of the building. We'll also be doing some final work. We have approval to start work to pull out the cabinets and replace flooring that has been replaced multiple times and paint the walls in the staff workroom. So we're getting closer. The museum really does look good. It's a lot of systems change. So when you walk in, you may not actually see it, except maybe in the bathroom. But suffice it to say that the building and environment and the building itself has been well taken care of in the project. And then I received final season reports from the Eric Sloan Museum and Old Newgate, and we're really working on pulling together better tracking data on all the museums. And we will, staff has been working and they use our point of sale system for some of this data. And they also use a program called Airtable to track expenses. So we're really beginning to hone in on how our sites operate more effectively, how our sites operate so we can then operate more effectively and put attention into areas that need attention. So some choice tidbits from Sloan include a total visitation of 2,700, which, believe it or not, is pretty much on par with visitation in past seasons pre-COVID. admission sales of almost $9,000, and gift shop sales, which topped out at nearly $12,000, which is completely unprecedented. I think the next closest gift shop sales were not even half that. So I do know, as I said, I think I've said this before, our curator on site, Andrew, is really a salesman by trade. He's doing an amazing job generating enthusiasm about Eric Sloane, and people are purchasing Eric Sloane books that we have in the gift shop, which is amazing. Old Newgate saw a little over 8,000 visitors with an admission sales of almost $34,000 and gift shop sales of over $17,000, almost $18,000. And again, these are good numbers. Newgate generally in a regular season serves between 10 and 11,000 visitors. We had a big plan pre-COVID for 2020 to boost our advertising and look at seeing how we can achieve a slightly greater visitation. But that did not happen, obviously. And I should note that there were times when even Old Newgate this season had to close because of COVID. There were staff who had breakthrough COVID cases, and we just didn't have enough depth in our staff to keep the museum open for a couple of days. So overall, we've had I feel that we've had a pretty good return after COVID. The other thing that's happening in these reports, and I will have reports from Whitfield and from Prudence Crandall. Prudence Crandall's will obviously look a little different since the museum has been closed now for 2 years. But the one of the fun things about them is that staff is including highlights of the season and then things like notable accomplishments, which is a different maybe than a highlight, because when you're closed, such as we were in 2020, there are still things that are accomplished. And so notable accomplishments and also goals for the next museum season. The reports look great and they're really comprehensive, and there's tables and there's infographics. I uploaded them. We just went over them yesterday, and I uploaded them into your Dropbox this morning in case anybody's interested in looking at them. And I will share the others when I receive them. So that's pretty much, that's the museums at a glance, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Liz, I have a technical question for you with regard to the Prudence Crandall House in Cronenberger. Are there clauses in the contracts for penalties if they don't meet their deadline?
So the short answer is yes.
You don't need to go further. I just,
Yes, there are.
The second question is, are they charging you on a daily basis for still being on site after the deadline?
So because we work and use DAS, the Department of Administrative Services, which is a state agency, as our essentially as to manage the construction project for us, all of that is constantly negotiated between Cronenberger and DAS, and we as the client are apprised of what the negotiations look like. So right now, that is a complicated and somewhat fraught question, Tom.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Any other questions for Liz? No? Thank you, Liz. That's great. Next item on the agenda is liaison and public and private agencies. Is Jane with us? What about Mary Falvey?
They both were here earlier, Tom, but I'm not. Jane was on the phone. She may still be. Jane, are you with us? Not hearing her. I do not. Oh, there's Mary Falvey. She's on the list. Mary, are you here?
Okay.
Falvey?
Yep, I'm here. I was just waiting to see if Jane was gonna.
Okay.
I always defer to Jane first. Good afternoon now, everybody. Not much to report on legislative because we're not back in session yet. But just to let you know, this will probably be my last time speaking with you at these types of meetings as president of CPA. Effective January 1st, I'm stepping down as president. I will still be at CPA. but need to spend some more time, hopefully finishing up my master's in public history next year. So need to prioritize some of my time. However, certainly we'll be working with CPA. We will be happy to help in any way possible to see that SHPO has adequate funding for staffing. I think that would be an important role for CPA to be able to work with them. One of the things we instituted, thank you to Liz Shapiro, this year was we were having regular meetings during the legislative session to make sure we were all on the same page. So I'm hoping that will continue with the executive committee of CPA. And other than that, that was about it.
Great. Thanks, Mary. That ends the meeting. Does anybody have any other things to be addressed? If not, our next meeting is Wednesday, January 5th, 2022 at 9:30. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Oh, come on.
So moved, Margaret.
I know you guys are crazy.
Second, Christine.
All right. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Have a great holiday. See you in January.
Thanks, Tom.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.